Welcome to part 2 of nonverbal communication. So let's talk a little bit about nonverbal behaviors. The first nonverbal behavior that I would like to talk about is eye contact. Eye contact is actually one of the best regulators that you can have when it comes to nonverbal communication. So remember, regulators are things that help control the flow of interaction in interpersonal communication. So there are several different types of eye contact. There is cognitive eye contact, which is kind of like the thinking when you were to kind of move your eyes and your face to the corner of a room. You look up into the air like you're trying to have a thought about something. That is the cognitive eye contact. Monitoring eye contact is when you're watching something. So you're monitoring events, you're looking at something, you're gaining knowledge from something. Regulatory eye contact, the third one, is when you are invited to kind of interact with that person. So think about in class, if I were to ask a question of a certain student and I were to move my eyes towards the student and look at them and say, Fred, please speak up. And then I look directly at the student. That is regulatory. That is the invitation to welcome in somebody into the conversation. Think about when you're in a conversation with like 2 or 3 people and you are looking at everybody. Or think about the absence of that when you just have a conversation one-on-one with somebody and there's a third person there and you don't ever look over. That's kind of like a nonverbal cue that you don't think that they're standing there or that you don't want to have a conversation with that person. So that's regulatory. Expressive is any sort of eye contact that expresses emotion. So if you were, to look sad with your eyes or look happy with your eyes, you can communicate a lot with expressive eye contact. And a lot of this is socially dictated, right? So you go to a wedding, your emotion in your eyes, you want to be happy and excited and joyful, right? Versus the opposite of that, which would be like a funeral or a wake or a memorial service, right? A lot of times your eye contact is much more much more sorrow driven. It's sad. It kind of looks depressing in a way, right? So you have very kind of like somber look to your eye contact. The next one is facial expressions. And this is anything that you do with your face that shows emotion, right? So think about smiling, right? That's a very good example of a facial expression that immediately and almost cross-culturally, right? Because I think smiling is universal across many different cultures, shows an emotion, right? Shows happiness, shows joy. It's a very inviting facial expression. Your facial expressions, you as the communicator, a lot of times can't control these as much as you can control your words. And that's why nonverbal behavior is sometimes more believable because your facial expressions absolutely send a message about what you're thinking or how you're feeling about a certain situation, right? I always tell this story that one of my good friends that I used to work with years and years ago used to joke that I had a staff meeting face because if I was irritated at the staff meeting we had in our office, apparently I looked down and had this very like stern, stoic look that I don't normally have. And she knew I was pissed about something. So she would say, "Oh, Katie's staff meeting face," right? Facial expressions. I didn't even know I did that, right? That was kind of unconscious in a way, but I did it enough and she was able to make the connection with me not being happy with my facial expression that she gave it a term, right? A staff meeting face. So facial expressions are absolutely telling of your emotion and how you feel. Verbal cues, which sounds a little counterintuitive to what we're talking about, but vocal cues usually are in the background of nonverbal behavior. So the book calls them kind of like back channel cues, where these vocal cues are used along with nonverbal. So things like uh-huh, or clearing your throat, or something that doesn't actually form a sentence to use verbal communication, but they are vocal cues that you almost use non-verbally to help convey an emotion. So think about those small little things that we do with our voice to actually show something or communicate something, right? So these aren't full-blown verbal words or sentences that we're using, but we call it, like, again, we kind of call them back channel cues that are used along with nonverbal behavior. The next one is space. Space is absolutely a nonverbal communication area that we like to talk about, because how close or how far away we are communicating with somebody absolutely sends a message. And there is actually 4 different levels of space that we consider in nonverbal behavior and nonverbal communication. So the very first one is the furthest away you can be from somebody, and that's considered public space. That is anything that is 12 feet or further is considered a public space. So there is more than intimate conversation going on. There's a lot of people usually. You're in a bigger flow of the public, 12 feet and further. The closer you get is called a social space, and that is anywhere from 4 to 12 feet. And social space typically is the zone of, like, we call group interactions, right? These are things that usually have a few individuals, usually have some sort of governing relationship happening, right? So you're gathered for professional reasons, or you're gathered for maybe a social reason that doesn't necessarily have an intimacy to it. That is considered social space. I kind of, we hear the term social distancing, right? And that's 6 feet or further. That's this right now, right? We're using that term to actually talk about space that is being used. So social space is anywhere from 4 to 12 feet. But remember, social distancing for the COVID-19 virus is 6 feet or further, right? Don't forget that. The next closest you can get is called personal space, and that is 1.5 feet to 4 feet. And personal space is usually family and friends, right? These are people that we know more intimately, right? Think about 1.5 feet that you would stand away from somebody, right? Public, unless you're, at a concert or something that, forces you to be in very close, intimate quarters. Personal space is typically the kind of space that warrants conversation. It warrants kind of closer family and friends to be together. If it typically, this is the point in which, if you feel like somebody's invading your space, it's typically at the personal space level when somebody gets closer than you would like them to be, right? So this is where we start to get that uncomfortable vibe when it comes to nonverbal communication. The closest you can get is called intimate space, and that is 0 to 1.5 feet. So 0 obviously being right up there with you, right? Intimate space, you are the closest you can be. You are obviously very personal and very intimate with this person, because if you are 0 from each other, you are connected at the skin. And then up to 1.5 feet is considered a very intimate space, right? Probably very few people in your life use intimate space, right? It's probably very, very close friends, significant others, and very close family members, right? That you would use intimate space with. Here's a little graphic to kind of show you that that I just went over. So this, I like this because it's colorful and I like color. The casual space or causal space that they have here is personal space that I just gave you. So the book, I think, uses personal space, but casual is also a space term that they use for anywhere from 4 feet to 12 feet. So. Okay, next one is territory, and that is what you do with your space around you. So you know that there's different levels of space, right? There's intimate space, there's personal space, there's social space, and then there's public space. What you do with what is around you is considered territory. So the nonverbals that you use in the space around you are absolutely indicative of the type of nonverbal behavior you have. So I think that the book uses the coffee shop order example to show that how you order around you is absolutely how you dictate your space. So you are close enough, right? You have a certain level of communication, a certain level of nonverbal communication you use when you walk into a place and order a coffee. So a lot of times, again, that is culturally dictated. Touch is a nonverbal behavior that's absolutely used to show empathy and show emotion and show caring and concern. A lot of times touch is used in support of nonverbal behavior, or I'm sorry, verbal behaviors. So it's a good nonverbal tell that you can, put your hand on somebody's arm, or you can give somebody a hug, or you can put your hand on somebody's shoulder to show them that you care, that there's concern, that there's an emotion being shared, those types of things. The last one is appearance. And this is a nonverbal behavior that actually kind of sends a message of who you are, right? We talked about this a couple weeks ago, that a lot of times you can say, people will obviously make judgments about you based on your appearance, right? We talked about how they listen to the beginning and the end of what you say, and they will look at you, and based on your own set of attitudes, or their own set of attitudes, values, and beliefs, their own set of lived culture, their own perspective, they will make calls. I think I use the example of if I walked into the room the first night, in flip-flops and yoga pants and a baggy sweatshirt and my hair up in like a messy ponytail, what assumptions you would make about me based on that, right? So an appearance nonverbal means that you speak who you are based on how you dress and what you appear to be, right? If you've heard that term, dress for the job you want, right? That's actually kind of tied into nonverbal behavior of appearances, which is the way in which you present yourself. You speak words without words coming out of your mouth based on how you appear to other people. So that absolutely is a way to say something without ever opening your mouth. So I have an example here of Buddy the Elf, which is a kind of personal space example. I think I might have actually shown this in class already, but I wanted to go back and talk about how this also relates to the nonverbal behaviors as well, like how close and intimate he gets. So I left this slide in the lecture so that I could tell you about it, and then I am going to link the video in this week's set of videos so you can watch it. It'll be one of 2 video links that I have for you to watch. Then we have interpreting these nonverbal messages. So the word tell is actually something that you will hear. I think I might have used it in this lecture already, but things that you will hear us say over and over again, which is, what are the tells that we get from nonverbal behavior? What are we being told without anybody actually listening to the words that come out of our mouth, but in a way listening to our nonverbal behaviors? So you look for these things. Tells is defined as nonverbal cues that give away what we are thinking or feeling. And what we look for in tells is the immediacy of things. So how quick somebody gives a nonverbal reaction, how quick somebody shifts their eyes, how quick somebody gives the hug, how quick somebody's facial expressions change, right? The quicker those things happen, the more reliable they are, because those are typically true, honest, nonverbal reactions to what people are saying. Those are the ones that we say we trust nonverbal more than we trust verbal. This is the perfect example. You look for how immediate those tells are, because the quicker they are, the more truthful and more secure you can be in those messages that they tell. We also look for kind of responsive arousal cues. So these are things like hand gestures that go up immediately. You throw your arms up, right? Facial expressions that immediately change, right? Those are considered responsive to things that you're saying, and they typically are true, accurate responses to what you are saying. Those are the ones that we can trust the most, because responsive, again, you have time to think about your words in a way. You have time to formulate a response, but your facial expressions are very responsive when you think about how quickly they come and how accurate they are. Also, we look for cues that show us displays of kind of power, or displays of dominance, or displays of taking charge of a situation. The book talks about how posture is a really good one, like somebody adjusts themselves, stands up taller, somebody shifts the way their shoulders are being held. Those are definitely cues that you can tell of somebody who is in a power